Hello everyone, welcome to another video in this full stack Flutter development series. In this video we'll be looking at tidying up a few things in our Flutter application, in our authentication module, and also to run a few integration tests to ensure that our authentication API is connecting to our backend and is actually signing into a user, creating a user, and also to sign out. So let's begin. The first thing, I want to refactor this sign out method so that instead of returning void, I want to return a result of type bool to tell whether or not the sign out was successful. I also want to add as a part of my API contract, I want to add also the sign out method. So the same, returning a boolean and our sign out method, and this method will accept a token in order to sign out successfully. Since our token will be used by our backend to determine if it's valid to be signed out. We'll quickly import our token using relative path here. So there we have our contract, and now we need to implement these methods in our contract API and also our auth service. So if we find our email auth, we can see sign out is here, and all we need to do here is to say return and call the API with this sign out method. Pass in the token. So now this method must accept the token also. This should return a result type. Here we have our sign out method in our email auth, and a similar thing for our Google auth. We open our Google auth, and for our sign out method, again the return type must be result bool, and we accept a token. Here we are going to say that we're gonna use the API and we're going to call the signout method on the API, pass in the token, and then we're going to check if the sign out was successful. So the result, await, if the result that has value, get the value which is supposed to be a Boolean value. So if it is true, then we can do our Google disconnect and return our result. So there we have our sign out also for our Google Auth. So now to implement in our Auth API the sign out method, so quickly create that missing method which is sign out. So for sign out method in our API, what we're going to do first is that we're going to set the URL, which will be the base URL auth/sign out. So that is the URL for our sign out API backend. After that, we are going to set the headers. So we set the header so that the token will be passed in the header. So I'm going to say set header content type, and the content type will be application JSON. Then I'm gonna set the authorization in the header to be the value of the token. So there we set our header. Then we are going to make a request to the API. So the response will be, or make a request to our backend. The response will be client. We're going to say post, so it's a post method to that particular URL, which is our URL, and we are going to set the headers of this post method to the headers that we have created. Then I am async. Then I'm going to say if our response, if we have a status code that is not 200, that means there was some failure, or the sign out was not successful from the backend, then I'm going to say result. I'm going to return a result with a value of false. Else, if the sign out was successful on the back end, I return a result with the value of true, that yes, user has successfully signed out. So there is my sign out method. There's also a few things to clean up in my post credential method here, where this client post method needs a header. And so I am going to set the header to tell it that the content type must be of type application. So the content type must be application. JSON. And this is so that the post method will post the body or the credential as a part of the body in JSON format. I also want to encode this body, so I'm going to say encode into JSON format or JSON string, which will pass by the body. If this is not done, then the client will throw an error. So there we have our auth API set up with all our methods ready to be tested. But first, before I test this, I want to create our sign out use case. Since currently we only have our sign in and sign up use case. So I am going to quickly create our sign out use case. Sign out use case. And again, like the sign in use case, this will use our auth service. We'll inject that into our constructor, and then we'll create our execute method, which will return the result again of type bool. And this execute will accept a token as the parameter. We'll import our classes also the result from async dart. So all these should be relative path. So inside our execute method, we call our auth service sign out method, and we pass in the token. So there we have our sign out use case. So now we'll write a few integration tests to test that our API is calling our backend and is communicating successfully. So inside of our test, I am going to say create a folder called integration. And inside integration, I'm going to create another folder called API. Then I'll create the auth API test. Now, it is good practice to test as you go along, so that when everything is finally connected, then it will work seamlessly without us trying to do manual testing. So as we test each component by themselves as building blocks, then when we tie everything together, then it will work seamlessly. So here I am writing integration tests to ensure that my API is calling my backend and everything is working as it should. So for this test, I need a few dependencies. So first I need my auth API, which is what I am testing. So this is the system under test. I'll import that. I need my base URL, which will serve as a dependency for my auth API. So the base URL, my local server, which is HTTP localhost 3000. So that's my base URL, or the host. Inside of my setup method, so inside of the setup, I'm going to say sut equal auth API, and pass in the base URL. And I also need a client, or an HTTP client. So I'm going to import that. I'm going to import HTTP as HTTP. Gonna instantiate that client. And then inject it inside my auth API. So there we have our setup. So the first test that I want to write is one for my sign in call, or sign in API method. So I'm going to create a group, sign in, then for the tests I'm going to say that it should return JSON web token from, or when successful. So this will return a JSON web token from the server when it is successful. So I need to set up my user that I am testing. So I'm going to use a valid user. So I'm going to create a credential for a valid user that I know exists currently in my Mongo database. So you want to use a valid user since you are testing this success case. So I know I have a user in my database with this particular credential. So I'm going to create that credential. Then after I create that credential, I am going to call the sign in method. So I'm going to say result equal to sut sign in, and pass that credential. Then I'm going to check that my expectation is successful, which is that result as value. Need to await the stream as value, get the value is not empty. So if it was successful, then my result as value would not be empty. So how do I get this working? First, I will have to start my server. So to start my server, I go into the terminal and I'll go into my backend. Then I am going to run my server, which is npm run dev. So now my server is started and is listening on port 3000. So if I run this test, I am expecting that it should pass since this user is in my database if everything is working as it should. As you can see, I am getting an error here that says encodable object fail, and I think I know where the issue is. It's right here in my mapper. This should be off type because that is what is expected from the server or by the server when it is looking through the parameters for the authentication type. So again, if I should go ahead and run this again, the same error again, and I think the issue again is with the auth type, where because I'm using an enum, it is basically returning something like auth type dot email. No, I need email from this, not this entire string. So what I'm going to do is to say to string, then split that string by the period and get the last so that I can get the email portion. Let us try again. And now my test is successfully passing, and I'm actually getting a user from the database. So there is a user in my database with this credential, and I am getting a JSON Web Token when this user signs in successfully. Now I will test my sign out, and there are more scenarios that you guys can test. I will not write those tests, but you can go ahead and write them. For example, you can test what happens when you enter an invalid credential. Test that the error case is successful. Test also for the sign up method. Create a credential and test that the sign up method is working as it should. But for this video, I am just using the sign up and the sign out method. You guys can do the rest on your own. So for my sign out test, what I've done is I've moved the credential to a global space that it can be used by both these tests. And for the sign out, I fetch a token string by signing in with that credential. then create a token from that token string, and then try to sign out using that same token. Now, in order for this to work, since we are using our Redis server to invalidate or to store those tokens that are signed out, we need also to start our Redis server. So let's do that. So as you can see, my Redis server is already started, but if you want to start yours, you can use the command brew services and start Redis. So my Redis server is started, and therefore I can go ahead and run this test to sign out. So if I run this test, let us see what happens. So now I'm getting this error invalid port. So somewhere inside my API, something is not configured properly right here. So it should be auth, just as how these are. Then again, let us try the test. Now my test is passing as it should, and if we should check our Redis server, we should see that a token is written to it to show that the token was created and was invalidated. So let us check that. So to check that, we'll use the Redis CLI, and we're gonna say keys, all keys. If I run that, then you can see that we have this token that is added to our keys to show that this token was invalidated when the user signed out successfully. So now we have our sign in working, our sign out working. Our API is connecting to our backend and is calling those methods successfully. And again, you guys can go ahead and write tests, integration tests for those other methods, the sign up method, and you can write for error cases what happens when, for example, a user does not exist, that kind of thing, or if there's a failure when trying to sign out. So that's it for this video, guys. Thank you for watching. Remember, the code is also on GitHub, so you can check that out, and share the video, like, comment, and subscribe. See you in the next one.